Hey everybody, I'm Bill Vencil. This is Chords of Orion. It's all about ambient guitar here. I recently posted a walkthrough of how I mixed my tracks for my up-and-coming album, Layers. It will be releasing in April of this year, 2023. On this video, I'd like to walk you through my mastering process. So let's get to work. All right, as you can see, I've got Logic Pro fired up, and that's point number one. Logic Pro is the first tool that I use when I master my mixes. So let's see what I have going on. You'll see I've got a track set up for each of the songs that will be on the album. You can see the song titles here on the left-hand side. And in each track, what I've done is imported my mixed stereo file for the track. In other words, I've got a Logic project in which I do a full mix down for each piece, and then I pull it into a mastering project in Logic Pro. We're going to look at the last piece on the album. It's called The Hard Road. And again, I did a breakdown of the mix for The Hard Road. I'll link that at the end of this video. Let's take a quick listen to the piece, just a little bit of it. All right, yeah, it sounds good. I like that piece a lot. What I do is basically, again, I pull each of the stereo mixes into this Logic project. And I've got a couple of goals that I'm looking to accomplish in this mastering project. Number one, I want to get all of the pieces, all of the songs up to the correct level for distributing to iTunes, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, all that good stuff. I want to get my levels right, and I want to get them balanced between each track, so that if you were to listen to the entire album, you could move from track to track without having to turn your volume control up and down. The second purpose is that I want to achieve a tonal balance that is pleasing as you move from track to track. I don't want one track to be overly bright. I don't want another track to be overly dull. I want them all to have a similar tonal balance, so it sounds like, if you're listening to it, it sounds like you're listening to an album. So to that end, what I have done on each of the tracks in the project, I have added a single plugin that I love, I've been using for many, many years. That's iZotope Ozone. And in this case, I'm using Ozone 10. So let me pull up Ozone for the Hard Road for this particular piece. If you think about mastering, mastering a track, it's really divided into a couple of different areas that you're going to want to address. One is EQ, so you'll be making likely little EQ tweaks. Another one is dynamic range. You may add a little compression, or maybe not, depending on the piece. A third one would potentially be imaging. In other words, the stereo image. You may adjust the stereo image so that all of the songs on your album have a similar kind of feel. And then, as I mentioned prior, the last piece that I normally address, is the issue of loudness, to make sure that all the pieces are of a similar loudness. So let's walk through this just a little bit. First, I'm going to turn off Ozone and play a little bit of the track, and then I'll turn it back on. Okay. Let me get to the spot where the drums are. There we go. Now I'm going to turn Ozone on. Now, it's not a crazy difference, but it is a good bit louder, again, because I want to bring it up to the correct level. I'll talk about that in a minute. So first up, let's talk about EQ. Ozone has an interesting capability where you can match the EQ of a particular song to a reference track or a reference, an EQ reference. In this case, actually across the board for my album, I'm using the reference that Ozone provides called Cinematic. And you can see here a kind of a visual of what the basic EQ curve looks like. So if I play the track, check this out. So you can see I'm kind of I'm kind of relatively close. It kind of follows the arc. And I don't want to try to force it in too much because it's not going to sound good. But I use that kind of as a reference for determining how to EQ. So I'm scooping out a little bit in the, say, 60 to 300 range. That's where a lot of mud lies. I'm bringing up a little bit in the high mids. So that would be 600 to about 3K. And then I've got a little lift as we get into the high end, the high frequencies of the song. And again, it sounds pretty good to me. Let me turn that off. You can hear it's pretty subtle. Now, Ozone 10, this is the newest version, has a couple of other cool features that are somewhat related to EQing. One of them is called Stabilizer. And this is a lot like the Soothe 2 or dynamic EQs that seek to reduce resonant frequencies. So I've been using this quite a bit on my masters for the last, several months or so. So if you watch what's going on here, you'll see that Stabilizer is dynamically reacting to the music and seeking to drop frequency ranges that might be a little more prominent and bring up frequency ranges that might be lagging a little bit. So you can see here we're dropping a little bit in that same range, that 100 to 300 range where that mud lives, and giving a little bit of lift in the high mids. Next up, I want to talk about compression. I don't have a full-on compressor on this track, but I'm using a microdynamics compressor that Ozone provides called Impact. And you can see what is happening here. Again, this is very subtle, but if you look at the line there in the middle, you'll see where it's compressing and expanding a little bit of the dynamic range. Yeah, and I think it helps. It just really helps to smooth out the dynamic range. The next topic is imaging. So this is the stereo image. And I do use the Imager in Ozone 10 quite a bit to adjust my stereo image. And you can adjust the image by frequency range. So let me just play you an example here. Let's get the kind of the mids here. Now, if I bring down this slider, you'll hear it collapse to mono. And I can bring it way up. It's too much. Just about right. Just about right. So you can control each frequency band. You can adjust the bands however you wish. And then you can kind of customize that stereo image. It's always good, though, to check against mono to make sure that everything sounds like it makes sense. So Ozone has a little mono button right here that allows you to do so. Yeah, it works great. Next up is Dynamic EQ. This is another form of compression, but it allows you to specify a frequency range that you would like to compress. And it will then dynamically compress those frequency ranges. And as you can see, I'm not going for large amounts of compression. I'm looking for very subtle compression in different frequency ranges, again, to smooth out the tonal characteristic of the track. And then finally, let's talk about loudness. So I'm using the Maximizer, and that's the limiter, the the brick wall limiter that comes with iZotope. Almost every DAW has a brick wall limiter. Logic does. I know Studio One does. Reaper does. Pro Tools does. They all do, right? So this is iZotope's brick wall limiter. And I'm not really trying to brick wall limit here. What I'm looking to do is get this track up to a particular volume or loudness so I can feed it into the stereo bus. So before I go there for a minute, let's just take a look at, again, what I have going on. Each of these 10 tracks has its own instance of Ozone 10, and I've customized it to each track, and I've tried to get each track up to a particular level, and they all feed into the master bus so that when I render each of the tracks out, they're going to go through, the hard road is going to go through its own instance of Ozone 10, and then it will feed into the master bus and go through 3 other effects that I have lined up. Let's take a look at those. The first effect on the master bus is the FabFilter Pro-R reverb. And I've got just a very mellow reverb set up, and it's the same reverb that all 8 tracks are going to run through. The reason why I'm using a reverb like this is to give each track a similar feel. In other words, each track has a feel like it's sitting in the same space. So this might be too subtle to hear on YouTube, but let me play this track, and I'm going to stop it and see if you can hear this reverb decay kind of ringing out. Did you hear that? A little bit of a room sound? Let me play it again. Okay, every track has that dynamic. So, for example, if we go to the first track, it's called Layers. It's the title track of the album. Again, you can hear that Pro-R kind of room sound. So each track, I'm going to bounce each track individually to create the mastered file, but each track individually is going to go through that Pro-R reverb and get the same reverb sound printed into the track, again, to give each track a familiar feel. The second thing I've got going on in the master bus that each track will run through after the reverb is a tape simulator. And I'm using the Softube Tape plugin, which I really, really, really like. So if you check this out here real quick. And I'm not going to go over all of these settings. It would take too long, but just let it be known I've got a kind of a tape setup where the level coming into this plugin bumps up against that 0 mark on the meter, so the 0 mark on the VU meter. So it's not going to be distorting a lot. It's going to be a mellow kind of tape sound. I'm using the cleanest tape type, which is A in this case. And I'm boosting the highs just a little bit to give it a little bit of shimmer, tape shimmer. And I think it sounds really good. So each of the 8 tracks is going to run again through this master bus. We're going to run through the Pro-R reverb and then run through the Softube Tape plugin. And then finally, I've got a Plugin Alliance BX limiter True Peak limiter setup. And this is basically going to catch any of the peaks that are coming into it and limit it down to -1 dBFS, so -1 dB full scale, and it's going to be the true peak. So if we check this out, you can see what's going on here. All right, so That's what I'm doing in Logic. So I've got the 8 tracks set up. I'm adjusting each track separately with Ozone 10, and then I'm running each track through a set of 3 plugins that are all the same settings for each track. So in a way, I'm not really mixing, but I'm mastering into those 3 plugins. And in terms of loudness, what I'm shooting for is about -11 LUFS. So LUFS is a loudness standard that's commonly in use now, in particular for broadcast and for every streaming service. All right, as you can see in the middle of the screen, I've got Finder pulled up, and there are 8 wave files there. Those are the 8 tracks that I bounced out of Logic Pro after setting up the mastering plugins that I just reviewed with you. Once that's done, I pull those files into another piece of software. This piece of software is called HOFA CD-Burn.DDP.Master. And I've been using this product for a long, long time. I really like it. It's totally optional, so don't feel like you need to go out and buy it or anything like that. But I like to use it because I do occasionally create mastering projects that are distributed on CDs. And this can easily create a CD distribution package according to the what is called the Redbook standard for CDs. So it's really convenient. But it's also really good for streaming distribution because it makes it very easy to sequence and time and space out the tracks. So as you can see here, I've got all 8 of my tracks lined up in the HOFA product. Here is that first piece again. Oh yeah. Here's the second piece. Oh yeah. And number 5. I'm giving you a little bit of a sneak peek into some of these sounds. Number 6. Number 7. There we go. And number 8, the hard road, which we've been talking about. So again, what I can do is just easily drag in each of these files and kind of sequence them out on the timeline. And in HOFA, it kind of tracks what's going on in the upper area here, and I can easily add in the titles, my ISRC numbers, and all the other information that I might want on the files. In addition, I want to talk about this for just a minute. You will see a little space called a pre-gap. So up in here, you'll see it's a pre-gap, and in this case, it's 1 second and 747ths of a second, so 1.747 seconds. And what this is, it's a little gap between the 2 tracks. So for example, if I finish out layers here, let me go ahead and play that and listen to how it spaces with the next track, which is called The Water is Wide. Yeah, so if you think about a CD or a vinyl LP, what normally sits in between 2 of the tracks? It's a little space, right? And typically it's going to be in that 2-second kind of range. It could be a little bit shorter. It could be a little bit longer. And what that space does is it provides your brain just a little bit of a rest between each track. So you can do a little reset and your brain is ready to hear the next piece of music. One of the nice things that HOFA does automatically is when you set up your album layout and you create the pre-gap areas, when you render them out for streaming, what HOFA does is it adds the pre-gap to the previous track. So for example, this is track 1, Layers, and then I've got track 2, The Water is Wide. That 1.7 second gap would actually get added to as silence to the end of the first track, Layers. And that way, even though you're still, in a streaming environment or maybe on Bandcamp, when you play the album through, you still get that little gap between both of your songs, and you can still kind of retain that feel, that space, that drama, that kind of brain reset to make sure that your listeners are ready to hear the next track. After you've got everything laid out, you can simply render out into its final form, whether it's 16-bit or 24-bit, your finalized masters that will be delivered to either DistroKid or CD Baby or wherever, whoever you're using for distribution. All right, there you have it. That's my current process for mastering my albums. So again, if you don't have the same set of software, no worries. You can accomplish the same goals with whatever recording software you use. Almost every piece of recording software can be utilized to master music and to prepare it for final distribution. Just remember a few things that I've mentioned along the way. One is achieving a similar tonal balance across all of your tracks. So when people listen to your album, if they feel like it's a real album. Number two would be to ensure that the volume or the loudness levels of each of your tracks is similar, again, to create a seamless listening experience. And number three is to, again, on the loudness side, to get the loudness and the other specifications of the files up to whatever the standard is for your digital distributor. Once all that's done, the only thing left to do is to upload your music to your distributor. Do you have any mastering tips for us? If you do, I'd love it if you would drop a comment and let's get some conversation going around all of our best mastering tips so we can all benefit together. I've got a playlist here of other ambient guitar recording techniques, and I'll see all of you over on those videos.